I am going to begin this morning, and I'll then pull my chair aside so I am not sitting next to Jennifer the entire time. Um, but for those of you familiar, I usually kick off each session with a bit of a question to help set base. And I just asked Jennifer before, are you going to tell this story anywhere else? Because there's a story that my question is, would you tell this story? It's a story I love that when Jennifer was in London doing research on Lilius, she emailed me and told me a little bit about this thing that had happened on this day in London. And actually, you write about it really beautifully in the book. It's a beautiful passage in the book. So can you tell us about that day as part of your experience of the Lilius journey?
Yes, this is fun because it's not directly part of my talk. So I'm glad that you asked. But yeah, when I spent about 6 weeks in London researching, which you'll find out about soon. And I didn't really know. I just found a Christian kind of retreat that had cheap rooms. I thought it happened to be in East London, and I showed up, and it it turned out that I had found this retreat house in the part of London where the Indian and Bangladeshi immigrants had really just created almost this own little sub-city, the subculture in East London. And so everywhere, I'm studying this woman who's a missionary to Muslims, and everywhere I'm looking there are women who are veiled, and there's a mosque right down the street. it was a surreal kind of cross-cultural experience that I wasn't expecting going to London, and I actually thought was beautiful given the context. So one morning, I'm walking from my retreat house across the park, as I did every morning, to the underground, and I noticed that there's crowds everywhere, and there's police out, and they're blocking off streets. And I couldn't even go straight through the park. I had to go around the little park. Like, what is going on? And there was a little on the corner near the underground. There was a little Turkish bakery that I would go to in the morning, and I'll get my cup of coffee and something, and I'd take it with me. And I walked in, and there was nobody else in there, and all the staff were looking out the windows. I came in, I said, what's happening? And they said, the king is coming. The king is coming. And I said, okay, can I be here? And they said, yeah, but you can go over there too. And so I was standing there against the windows with all the staff at this Turkish bakery, and they had platters. They were going outside with platters of Turkish delight to stand on the street. The people, and I look out the window. Already there's just crowds and crowds. Like, the streets are completely full of people of every nationality you can imagine. This is maybe the most international part of London. And I'm standing there, and the Turkish bakery is on a little side street across from the park, and then the main street is there. And as I'm standing there with all these staff members from working, the motorcade pulls up, and the royal car pulls up and stops right in front of our window. Out pops King Charles and Queen Camilla, and they get out of the car right in front of us, and they go up to the park, and there is a woman with this incredibly beautiful light pink sari that's standing there greeting them, and they walk into the park, and it turned out that it was an anniversary of the killing of a Bangladeshi man that the park was honoring, and the king and queen were coming to join and to show solidarity with the Indian and Bangladeshi population of London. So that was a completely unexpected moment in my London experience that it just came out of nowhere, and it was just this moment of poetry of the moment really struck me in that moment, because I was about to go to the library to spend another day with Lily. I'm sitting there, and there are people from all over the world right in front of me, and right across the street is the Whitechapel Art Gallery, that was founded by Octavia Hill, who I wish I could have more time to talk about, who was part of the milieu at the time. Jack the Ripper was killing prostitutes right there across the street. Catherine Booth and William Booth, their rescue mission, was right in this same little neighborhood. They were rescuing these prostitutes and victims of sex trafficking at the same time as Lilius is doing that in West London. Her friends, some of her friends met her right down the street. Met because of Lily right down the street. So I was unexpectedly in the middle of this place where there are so many echoes of Lily around me, and that just that simple statement of the king is coming, the king is coming. I don't have any feelings about the British royalty. I know that's very complicated, but I felt like Lily's whole life was about like the king is coming, the king is coming. That was her cry her whole life. And so yes, I do talk about that in the conclusion of the book because it just felt it was a fun tourist moment, but it also just felt like this beautifully poetic confluence of things at that time. So.
Oh, thank you for sharing that story. I love the story. Thank you. And we're over to you.
Thank you. How many people were not there Thursday night? Okay, that's good to know. How many people had never heard of Lily Estrada before? Okay. Well, there are actually more people here who had heard of her than I expected. So that's things are improving. I just 3 weeks ago turned in or got the final editor approval of my final draft of this book. So this is very new. It's been a 3-year journey. I told them I could finish in a year. No. So this is very new, and I realized in preparing for this talk that I kind of had 2 dilemmas. After just having finished writing over 100,000 words on a topic, I don't really have any words left, and so I'm going to be drawing a whole lot from the book and quoting and paraphrasing a whole lot from the book. And if you end up reading it, which I hope you do, you'll recognize some things. And the other dilemma is that it's very hard to boil that down to an hour when I'm still so close to the subject. I haven't gotten enough emotional distance yet to be able to stand back and summarize. So I've got a lot of slides. I've got a lot of things that I'd like to talk about. I'm going to be skimming over the surface of a lot of things. And it was really nice last night to hear some of the concerns and questions and stuff that you guys were bringing to this weekend, because some of those things I think are going to be addressed pretty directly. Some I'd be happy to talk more about. And so I want to follow, I want to be flexible enough that we can kind of follow where you guys want to go. So as I'm going through these, please feel free to raise your hand and stop me. If at any point you want me to linger a little longer on a particular slide for you to see a piece of art or whatever longer, or if you want me to clarify or elaborate on something that I'm kind of skimming past, I'm happy to stop and just kind of let this go where you want it to go. All right, I will get started then. When I was in graduate school, and I told you a little bit about that part of my story last night, there was a woman, I think her name was Janet, in one of my classes. And Janet was she was a delightful, curious, energetic person. She was always actively engaged in discussions in the class. Just was delightful. She was kind of everybody's aunt, and was really popular amongst the students. And one time she was driving me home, and we were riding in her pickup truck listening to Rod Stewart. And I said, "What do you plan to do when you graduate?" And she said, "Oh, I won't be graduating." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Oh, I have lung cancer, and I'm not expected to live more than a year." And it was so matter of fact and so out of the blue, and like not a hint of self-pity to that. And I said, "Why are you here to step?" I mean, this is a hard programming. They did tons of reading, and everybody's stressed. Why are you doing this? And she said immediately, because when I get to heaven, I want to be able to have an intelligent conversation with Augustine. that was her answer. And I love that so much. And she said it was such a twinkle in her eye, but she was very serious. She truly believed that she was nearing the end of something, but that it was also the beginning of something, and that she was about to meet the people that she had studied and revered for so long. And so she was learning all she could before then to get ready for whatever this next chapter was going to be. And so she saw these people that we were studying and taking, exams about, these names in textbooks. She was thinking of these as people that she was going to be in relationship with for eternity. And in her mind, that was going to be very soon. And there was an excitement there. There are many, many ways in which my faith is tested when I study history, not the least of which is the outrageous Christian doctrine of the resurrection and all of its implications. And I have to ask myself, do I really believe what I say that I believe? Because if so, then this person that has written this diary that I'm holding in my hands right now, who scribbled this sentence 100 years ago on a beach in Cornwall, this is a person who is as real as the person I will be meeting at Starbucks for coffee next week. Augustine exists in some mysterious way, and we don't know exactly how this all works yet. But Lilias Trotter didn't just exist in the past. She exists somehow still in the mind of God, and I am going to see her and talk to her someday. Nearly a decade ago, two friends who didn't even know each other introduced me to Lilias at the same time. They both said, "Oh, you have to watch this documentary. It's on Amazon Prime, still there. It's free. I think it's $2 to watch. So please do watch it. Called Many Beautiful Things. It's about this English artist and missionary in North Africa in the 19th century, and nobody knows about her, but you should watch this." And so I watched the documentary 4 times. I watched it by myself. Then I watched it with a group of women who were gathering at my house on Saturdays to make art and be creative together. We watched it together. And then I watched it with Pete. As I said, you have to see this. And then I watched it, I think when he was gone, I watched it again alone. And every time I cried at the end. And there was something about this woman that spoke to me very, very deeply. At first, it was the thing that most drew me was the fact that she had been single her whole life, never had children. I had been single till I was, nearly 40. We don't have children. I've never felt like I fit in anywhere into any career path, any conventional box. And she had lived this life that would just broke out of all the boxes and lived a completely her own path in life. She had found her own unique path. And I'm not going to, spoil the end for you, but her life was so rich in love and in relationships. She did not die alone in a nursing home. We'll just say that. And she pursued this path that she didn't even know was going to lead her, and it led her away from any conventional boxes. And I needed that model, especially that time, what I was going through at that time. So I just fell in love with this woman. If you've read the book Miss Rumphius, does anybody know that picture book? A few people. Okay, that's your assignment. It's such a Linlathen book.
Miss Rumphius.
You don't have it here?
I don't.
Okay, I'm going to be adding a book to the library because it is a book you need to read. Miss Rumphius, Rumphius. It's my favorite picture book. And Lilias is the real life Miss Rumphius. I'll just say that. So I was captivated by her. I read everything I could by her and about her, which was not much, especially 10 years ago. Miriam Rockness is the only person still living, who has written a biography of her. There's only been about 3 biographies since her death. Miriam Rockness, a Presbyterian minister's wife, discovered Lilias and has done this incredible amount of groundbreaking kind of the work to piece together this woman's life from all the remaining pieces that we have. And I didn't realize how much work she had done until I got into the weeds myself, and like, wow, she did a lot. And so I read A Passion for the Impossible, her biography. I read everything I could by Lilias that Miriam was helping to put out in facsimile form, and I've got a couple of them here. Her 2 parables books, Parables of the Christ Life and Parables of the Cross. This is a book that Miriam edited of some of her art, along with quotations from her writings. And there's a couple of other books that Miriam has been putting out as well. I think these are the 3 that existed when it was first getting started. And I gave several presentations at Hutchmood at Robert Wood's conference and to groups of college students, especially focused on the idea of vocation and Lilias's ideas about vocation and creativity, because you could very easily oversimplify the life of this woman into the narrative of, well, she gave up the worldly path of art in favor of the holy calling of missions. You could oversimplify it. And I just wanted to say, no. That is not the moral of her story. Not at all. Miriam, yes, as I said, has spent decades doing this trailblazing work. And when I visited her, this is about the size of her kitchen table. It's huge, and she's got half a dozen of these. She was doing all this work with the letters and everything, just piecing together the life of this woman. And this is just one half page of this gigantic book that she had made. She also founded the Lilias Trotter Legacy Advisory Board, which is 7 women united by a commitment to preserving and sharing Lily's story and her art with the world. And they have been, through their efforts, about 15 books about or by Lily have been published so far, including, as I said, the reprints and some of the out-of-print unpublished works and facsimiles of some of her parables books. This is another one, A Way of Seeing. So I read everything I could get my hands on. I would talk to anybody who would listen about her. And so when an editor at a publishing house locally approached me about writing a book about her for lay people, I just immediately said, yes, whatever, yes. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't even think about writing it at that point. I just want somebody to pay me to spend time with this woman and get to know her better. And I knew her all of the diaries and stuff were out there, and I wanted to go see them. So whatever you want me to do, I will do if you just pay me to go over there to London. And so I signed that contract just as we were leaving to hike the Camino de Santiago, which we'll talk about more on Sunday. And so actually the walking with Lily and walking the Camino are very linked to me. I took her parable books with me on my Kindle so she could be my walking companion. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. This is my version of Miriam's book as my timeline wall as I was reading with all my colored sticky notes, trying to figure out, okay, what's going on at the time? When is she reading this? When is this? So that was my version of what Miriam was doing. But what I discovered was that what I thought I knew about Lilias and what had been made public so far of her writings and her art was just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that is almost entirely unexplored yet. And it's very exciting to be kind of at the beginnings of a real awakening of interest in her. And there's so much there. So months later, I found myself in the basement of the SOAS, the School of Oriental and Asian Studies at the University of London, going through the archive, 30 boxes worth of the Algiers Mission Band. This is the mission organization that she founded. There's also a growing collection in Wheaton and a couple of other places, but the bulk of it is in this basement in London, and it is a treasure trove. Megan, where are you? But yes, Megan has been there and seen at least 3 of the boxes, right? Spent 3 hours going through 3 of the boxes. And there are 30, and I did not get through everything in 6 weeks. At the heart of this collection are Trotter's beautifully illustrated leather-bound journals
one for nearly every one of her 40 years in Africa, filled with almost daily reflections on her experiences there, detailed, witty, often harrowing accounts of her camel journeys across the Sahara Desert with her paint box and her brushes in tow, deeply personal encounters with Arab culture, theological musings, word paintings of the natural world that are just a verbal cascade of color and delight. The pages are stained, smudged, stuffed with photos, dried flowers. The script is sometimes elegant with arabesque flourishes, and other places cramped, shaky, and ineligible. It is definitely not ready to be printed in a nice bound, edition of the works of Lilius, because handwriting expert's gonna have to go through some of it and decipher it. In the headers around the dates, in the margins, or taped onto whole pages are tiny watercolors and pencil sketches of the people she meets and the faces that she loves. Tiny paintings, only a few inches across, of vast desert landscapes. Architectural studies, floral studies, hand-drawn maps, photos, sketches from her travels around North Africa. I'm pretty sure this is Lily. She did often travel with one of her other, the leaders of the mission, Blanche or Helen, but this one was pasted into her diary, and I'm pretty sure that is Lily. It's a visual record of her life. It is as colorful and individual and revealing as the written record. The journals are a goldmine in themselves, but there are also decades of records, publications, photos, scrapbooks, letters that record the entire life cycle of this very unique and creative, ecumenical, women-led mission organization in the late 19th and early 20th century. Lily was actually the first Protestant woman to found and lead her own mission organization. She was respected by John Mott and Samuel Zwemer and other mission leaders at the time who put her on a level with Hudson Taylor. One obituary referred to her as a worldwide spiritual force, and yet she was almost completely forgotten for so long. There are piles of her sketchbooks and loose art in folders. I pick up an exquisite watercolor of alpine peaks in a sea of mist, and I'm amazed, as William Blake wrote, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And that's what her paintings are like to me. You can literally hold one in the palm of your hand, an entire mountain range distilled into a tiny. If you were at the lecture Thursday night, you heard me talk about her adventures in Switzerland, her love for, she called herself a tramp. She was an adventurer to the core. And I told the story, a funny anecdote of one of her trips with her friend Rose Kingsley, who's the daughter of Charles Kingsley, and a friend of Lily in her 20s. And Rose called her paintings color poems. And I love that because they are like little visual poems. They're distilling beauty down to its essence with remarkable economy. Color poems. And yet, look at that. I mean, that is like I left my hand in there so you could see the scale and the detail and just the elegance of her brushwork. It's such tiny. As small as they are, and as relatively untrained as she spoke in a visual language that was completely her own. Once you've seen a Lilias Trotter painting, you will recognize one anywhere. She has a style, a recognizable style and voice. And she attained instinctively what so many aspiring artists take years to find, which is her voice, her visual voice. Just as a side note, when I visited Miriam, she said, "Oh, I have to show you this." Somebody she knew who just was a collector, said, "I've got these old things that, you want some of these things, I don't know, old Bibles and stuff." And there was a sketchbook in there, undated, unsigned. And she said, "Look at this. This has got to be Lilias." And I agree. Like it's clearly Lilias. And so these things are still out there being found on eBay and, everywhere. Oops. Excuse me. Back. Nope. Sorry. There we go.
I keep seeing the purple now that you mentioned it at your talk.
Okay, yes.
Is there
Yes.
a particular reason why she painted such small?
Yes, I'm gonna get to
Okay, yeah,
that.
thank you.
Yes. There is a reason, and I can't wait to see what huge paintings she's gonna make someday when she has all the time in the world. But for now, mostly what we have of her are these little tiny paintings. Nearly every one of her journals begins or ends with the image of the close of day and the anticipation of sunrise. Not just the beginning of a new day or a new year, but the birth of new hopes and new possibilities, new opportunities for faith or service, and ultimately, most importantly, the eternal sunrise of God's new earth. She spoke of the sunrise gladness of resurrection life and all that it meant for our sufferings and our hope in the present. I want to come back to that later.
Speak up.
I'm sorry. There are also many personal notes and correspondence and unpublished manuscripts in these archives and letters. She was a very prolific letter writer, and we have some of them, and we're still discovering some of them. There's testimony after testimony of her unique character in these letters and these notes from other people. Her quote, genius for love and friendship, her life of great simplicity and high adventure. I've only barely scratched the surface of tracking down the papers of her friends and colleagues and memoirs to find references to her, or maybe some of her library, her own letters in these other archives. There's a Methodist minister in England named John McNeill, who's an avid collector of anything from this period, and he has recently discovered 2 of Lilius's letters that otherwise would have been completely lost to us. One of them was in somebody's attic, a box of McDonald's paraphernalia, and he just happened to know who Lilius was and immediately recognized her style. And Lily had sent McDonald a letter and a painting at the end of his life.
It's just that for those that aren't familiar with McDonald, is George McDonald.
I'm
It's
sorry,
not
George
everybody.
McDonald.
I know, we assume
George
everybody
Yes,
knows George
yeah,
McDonald.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
everybody here knows who
Okay, George McDonald, who is, does anybody not?
You should know.
Okay, if you know Kirsten. I didn't think you were allowed in Kirsten's house without knowing. So when I first told Kirsten I was writing this book, she said, "Oh, guess what? Somebody has just found this letter." Oh my goodness, that was I think one of the happiest days of my life. So there is a letter from Lily to McDonald written at the end of his life. John McNeill also, he's just the kind of person who goes to archives and just looks at stuff. And so he was at the Broadlands archive of Lord and Lady Copper Temple, we're going to hear about in a minute, just going through their letters and saw handwriting he recognized. And there was a letter, you can barely make out Lilius's name. So it's one of those, if you've seen old letters, they write this way and they write that way. And it's, but it was a letter from Lily to Lady Copper Temple, unmarked. It was not indexed at all. It was just in a folder full of papers. So who knows how many more there are up there, because she wrote so many letters up to the end of her life. In her will, she ordered that many of her sketchbooks be cut up and sent out to individual friends and families. And Miriam has done the work of finding a lot of those, but there are still her paintings ending up on eBay. So, there's a lot of stuff that's still out there. And to me, that's really, really exciting. In a lot of these pictures, you'll notice that I've deliberately not cropped out my fingers or other objects, because I really want you to see the scale of these and how tiny and yet intimate they are. Maybe this is boring to you all, but I love this kind of research.
Yeah.
I love the detective hunt of archival research. You heard some of my traumatic graduate school story last night, but my favorite thing I did in graduate school was a project where I heard that a local family had donated their great great grandfather's papers to the library, and he had been a missionary in India, and nobody had gone through it yet. And I got to go just pull out like the family's letters and clippings and all, and piece together the life of this man. It was the most fun I had in grad school, and so this felt like reawakening some of that. I got to do that again, and it was so magical to sit here every day in this archive, in this basement, and just say, "I'm right, good to spend the day with Lily," and just pull out her next diary, and just kind of be there with her as she's coming to life in these pages. I love her more today than I did when I started, and I've never gotten tired of her. There was a person here in these papers and in these diaries that I wanted to know. This is a 120-year-old leaf pressed between the pages, and standing. It's just nothing like reading history in a history book. You know, when you're sitting here touching this thing that the last person who touched this, either was her or knew her. I could imagine her sitting next to me. And every day when I sit there, I'd like almost be having this conversation with her in my head the whole time as I'm reading. Oh, Lily, I love that verse too. What would you have thought about this? What would you have thought about the Holocaust? What would you have thought about this, 21st century culture wars? And sometimes it was more, Lily, why did you say that? Are you sure you want to say that? You know better than that. Or, oh, Lily, I know you mean well, but if only you knew what that particular the idea would lead to or be distorted in the future. And I just had this kind of constant conversation with her. And I think that to me is what it's like to have a friend across time. Yeah. This is not a saint. This is not just like some hero in a history book. This was a human being, a real person like me who, had her struggles and her weak points and her blind spots. And yet somehow I'm going to get to talk to her for real someday in eternity. And she believed that. Absolutely. She believed that she would see me someday and you someday, even though she didn't know us yet. And I wanted to, when I sat down to write the book, I wanted to write it not so much as a biography or a work of history, but as an encounter with a person, a kind of an exercise in companionship across time. So it'd be like saying, hey, you got to come meet my friend. She's awesome. You'll love her. You're going to resonate with this and this and this about her. And when somebody says that to you, do you expect to go to, their house and meet the most important person who ever lived? No, and you don't expect to meet a perfect saint, but you're just looking for a kindred spirit, somebody who has, walked the path that you've walked just a little bit ahead of you and might have learned some things that you still have yet to learn. And as your friend has told you, there's just something valuable in being in this person's presence for a while. And I've learned that not everybody reads history that way. Not everybody finds those companions from the past that they can walk through in life. And I wanted to show a little bit of how that has looked, what that has looked like for me with Lily. So there are some personal stories in the book, and just raise that question of what, why and how do we make those historical companions who can be our friends along the way. George MacDonald is one of mine, Julian of Norwich, Lilius, Mr. Rogers. That's one of them. As I just mentioned, Julia. So when I was walking, this is totally a side point, but I need to recommend this book. When I was walking the Camino, I met up with our friends, the Canlises, who Kirsten knows, Matt and Julie Canlis, and they heard I was writing about Lilius and had no idea how I was going to write about her at that point. And they recommended this book, Julian of Norwich by Amy Frykeham. And I read it, downloaded it, read it on the Camino. This is one of my favorite books ever. It is so good. It's I almost recommend that you read this before reading Julian, because it'll give you this context. But Frykeham's whole approach But she writes that all biography is an act of empathetic imagination. We read and write to try to walk alongside someone who is far ahead of us, far away from us in time and space. And I loved that idea of the empathetic imagination. And that's her approach. She really is imagining and bringing you into the world of Julian, even beyond what we might know about the facts. But she has this imaginative approach so that Julian feels like a real person to you in this book. And so this had a huge impact on me in the way that I approached my book. And it's just a great book. So I wanted to recommend that to her. And Lily's teacher and her mentor, John Ruskin, who we'll talk more about, he said something I think was kind of similar. He was writing about the reading of books. And he said, you must, in a word, he's talking about authors and books, you must, in a word, love these people if you are to be among them. You must love them before you understand. You approach a book or a person in the present or in the past. You approach them with love in order to understand, to show this love by entering into their thoughts, by listening and learning from their ideas and their experiences that are not your own. You stand before a work of art, whether it's a book or a person, not first to study it and critique it, but to receive what it has to give. What does this awaken in me? There's a book called Real Presences. Have you ever read Real Presences by George Steiner? Nothing like that?
Yeah, I saw them.
Okay, his approach to art is much the same, and it's also shaped my approach to history. I read it in grad school, of this humble act of kind of hospitality, some of reverse hospitality. You're coming into someone else's space and their time period and their life, and you're coming with a humble spirit of listening and receiving first. And one of the things that I hated about grad school is that I felt like that's not what we were doing.
We were taught the opposite.
No. So that was one of the reasons why I had to leave. Nothing against grad school for those who find their place there. But all right. This is in one of her journals, Lily copied a quote from the devotional book When God Came by Bishop Bardsley. It's out of print. It was a little pamphlet, I think, that came to her, and she wrote this in her journal. It would be difficult to find a more perfect description of Lily's own soul. I am reading my notes instead of her quote. I'm trying to do this whole slideshow presentation thing for the first time, so I'm sorry about it. Here's the actual quote. When a soul sets out to find God, it does not know whether it will come, not know whither it will come, and by what path it will be led. But those who catch the vision are ready to follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth, regardless of what that following may involve for them. And it is as they follow, obedient to what they have seen, in the spirit of joyful adventure, that their path becomes clear before them, and they are given the power to fulfill their high calling. There are those who have the courage to break through conventionalities, who care not at all what the world thinks of them, because they are taken up entirely with the tremendous realities of the soul. And I just think that is such a perfect description of Lily's own story, that she is able to catch that vision and be obedient to what she has seen and walk forward on the path, not knowing where it has gone and not caring whether it is a conventional path or what anybody thinks of her. And she is following the vision and being obedient to what she has seen. And she's able to do this, I think, because she's an artist, and she's able to show the rest of us how to do this because she is an artist. All right, so how many of you read your assignment for the weekend?
Nobody? That is the George MacDonald essay. I know some of you did.
Yeah, I
It's
have
the
read
George MacDonald essay that
All
you
right.
do.
My husband read the assignment. Has anybody read MacDonald's essay on imagination? Okay. It's pretty dense. But it's wonderful. It's wonderful reading. It's his most encapsulated definition of what he views imagination to be. And I think it's a good framework for thinking about Lily. He says, we'll get to that in a minute. He says the imagination is the power in us that gives form to thought. It's the power in us that images, and therefore it is a thing inside of us that reflects the creative power of the one who made us. God created us to be his hands, the pigments in his palette, the actors on his stage, his musical instruments in the great symphony of creation, and we are invited into that ongoing work of creation with him. So imagination is an essential part of what it means to be made in the image of God. And we build cities, we start families, we cook dinners, we invent and explore and discover because we live our lives with this deep down impulse to look beyond what is towards what could be. And that very thing in us that imagines and creates beauty is also the thing that helps us to see beauty and to love the beauty around us. So he says the main duty of the imagination is to inquire into what God has made, following closely behind the one in whose image it was created. And not just in a scientific way, although he loves science, and so did Lily. But nature is not just a vast collection of facts to be uncovered. It means beauty means something. The truth of a thing, then, he says, is the blossom of it, the thing it is made for, the topmost stone set on with rejoicing. Truth in man's imagination is the power to recognize the truth of a thing. And wherever in anything God has made is in the glory of it, be it sky or flower or human face, anything that we see the glory of God, there a true imagination is beholding a truth of God. So imagination is a kind of spiritual sight. And this is essential for every person to develop, not just artists. So then we get to this, one of my favorite quotes. In very truth, a wise imagination, which is the presence of the Spirit of God, is the best guide that man or woman can have. For it is not the things we see the most clearly that influence us the most powerfully. Undefined yet vivid visions of something beyond, something which eye has not seen nor ear heard, have far more influence than any logical sequences whereby the same things may be demonstrated to the intellect. It is the nature of the thing, not the clearness of its outline, that determines its operation. We live by faith and not by sight. So MacDonald is saying that on this joyful adventure of faith that is sparked by vision, as in the quotation that we just read from Bishop Bardsley, imagination is our internal tourist guide, in a sense, our sense of direction, the part of us attuned, if we nurture it and develop it and train it well, attuned to the Holy Spirit, leading us towards an end that is beyond anything that we can even dream of now. And so how do we nurture that in ourselves? And the rest of that essay really answers that question. We have to feed it, just like our bodies. The imagination needs food and exercise in order to grow. One of the few remnants we have of Lily's childhood is her very first sketchbook.
Are those cowboys?
I don't think so. This is her sketchbook when she was 5 years old, given to her by her mother. And these are the settings of a little girl's summer. So that coastal scenes, there's steamships and sailboats in the background. There's a hill covered with like lollipop trees, a house with many windows, and a tree-lined lane. She'd clearly been people watching. And though they are very childishly drawn, we can see that there's no identical stick figures here. Every single person is unique. From the tartan kilts of the dancing bagpipers to the patterns on the little girls' dresses and the expressions on their faces. Already at 5 years old, Lily is looking and noticing the fringe on the lace and the feather in the hat and the cats. The cats wearing eyeglasses and smoking pipes. So these are the tiny seeds of her imagination that would grow and flourish into the artist that she would become. An artist that drew endless inspiration from the landscape and who dreamed up impossible things and who noticed and loved the individuality of all the people she met and all the cats as well. These seeds of her imagination were planted and nurtured in the very fertile soil of a remarkable family. When Lily's father, Alexander Trotter, who was a successful stockbroker in London's West End, married her mother, Isabella, he was a widower with 6 children already. Isabella bore him 3 more, Lilius, Alec, and Margaret. Who the whole family was very close. The younger 3 remained close until the end of their lives. And in many ways, the Trotters were a typical upper middle class Victorian family. They really embodied that Victorian ideal of hard work and education and duty and refinement. And they went to the Royal Opera and all, they gave their children all of the cultural opportunities of their class. But in other ways, they were very far from ordinary. Alexander and Isabella were exceptional people in their own way. They adored each other. They adored their children. Both were voracious learners. They read widely, were fascinated by geology and astronomy, modern engineering, other cultures. I could tell you all about their trip to America and learning about America. It's fascinating. So if the first duty of the imagination, as MacDonald says, is to inquire into what God has made, the Trotters were setting their children's feet firmly on that path. That shared trait of passionate curiosity in the Trotter family, their remarkably wide interests, their exposure to science, their itch to go places. Her siblings ended up all over the world, like Australia, South Africa, India, North Africa, Romania. These all led Lily again and again into a direct engagement with what MacDonald argued was imagination's most important teacher, nature. He said children should always be encouraged to observe, to take country rambles, to keep open eyes. And nature is a house decorated for us by the Father who truly knows what his children need in order to grow. And so it was above all else God's creativity that caused Lily's creativity to blossom in so many directions as she got older. But when she was 12 years old, the first great shaking of her life occurred. Alexander Trotter, her beloved father, died after an illness. Her mother was left devastated by a grief that she never fully got over. And the family moved out of her childhood home to a smaller flat on Montague Square in the neighborhood of Marylebone. I don't know how to say that, Marylebone in West London. It was a heavy, heavy, heavy blow. And it was at this most vulnerable point in her childhood, still grieving her father, that she began reading a serial story that was coming out in the Sunday magazine called The Seaboard Parish by George MacDonald. It's a story of a family, the Walton family, that was grappling with both sorrow and joy as they spent a transformative summer by the sea. And through the eyes of the Waltons, Lily encountered what would become a lifelong way of seeing, one that perceived divine truth shimmering just below the surface of the visible world. Nature is practically one of the main characters in the story. Her many moods and colors, her gentleness and power, her daily witness to the character and the delight of her creator. The coast of Cornwall becomes for the Walton family a canvas upon which they can watch God paint his masterpieces. Reverend Walton says, "The earth laughs out in green and gold. The sky shares in the grand resurrection." Little did Lily know at age 13 how prophetic this particular story would prove to be for her life. Like the preacher, Reverend Walton, she would find wide open spaces that allowed her soul room for gladness, not only in Cornwall, but in North Africa. Like his daughter Winnie, she would someday be taken under the wing of a brilliant, spiritually troubled painter. Like that painter Percival, she would face the question of how to carry out her creative calling in the midst of London's industrial ugliness. And when Reverend Walton urges his younger daughter to take up drawing, even if she's never going to be an artist, he explained that drawing trains the eye to notice, that it is a life lesson, not just an art lesson. It's a great thing, he says, to have your eyes open. This is something that MacDonald had learned from his friend, the renowned Victorian art critic and art professor John Ruskin, who believed that the most important thing he could teach a student was to see. He said, "I would rather teach drawing that my pupils may learn to love nature than teach the looking at nature that they may learn to draw it." We've got to learn to see in order to draw well. And it is also drawing that helps teach us to see. And in fact, when the character of Percival, and I learned this from Kirsten, she can tell you a lot more about this, is MacDonald's portrait of his friend Ruskin in so many ways. MacDonald wrote Seaboard Parish after a period of several years when Ruskin had been staying with the family. And in the novel, he's engaging with Ruskin's ideas about art and beauty and truth, both indirectly and directly. throughout the story. And so what that means is that 10 years later, when Ruskin discovers Lily and begins to teach her, she's already, in a sense, met him in the pages of MacDonald's story and is already primed for his teaching. So this is a man who, with his 5-volume manifesto, Modern Painters, had completely rocked the English-speaking world with his views on nature and the nature of beauty, the role of art. MacDonald loved Modern Painters so much that he gave a copy to Louisa as an engagement gift, right? Yes, yeah. It is hard for us to imagine why an art critic would be so famous, but he was not just a respected art critic. He was a celebrity. Like, he had almost single-handedly launched the pre-Raphaelite painters into fame, and throughout the mid 19th century, his opinion could make or break a new artist's career. He was completely transforming the whole cultural conversation around art and beauty, and attempting to educate the public in good taste. Not always successfully. Nobody either loved him or you hated him. Ruskin was not lukewarm about anything, and he did not suffer fools lightly. He was sued. By the time he met Lily, he was already kind of falling out of favor with a lot of people in the art world. And he was being sued for libel by the American painter James Whistler after he wrote of one of Whistler's paintings. I've seen and heard much of cockney impudence before now, but never expected to hear a coxcomb ask 200 guineas for flinging a pot of paint in the public space. He did not like that painting.
Did he ever get around to saying what he really thought?
No, he never said what he really thought. So by the time he met Lily, he was, the art world was beginning to turn against him a little bit. But even if you hated him, you could not get around the fact that Ruskin was a larger than life force in Victorian society. You could not escape his gravitational pull. Oops, did I miss it? Sorry. There we go. All great art is praise. This is two of the pre-Raphaelite painters that he really loved. The one on the right is the Light of the World by William Holman Hunt, and Lily had a print of this on her wall, and it led to a very interesting encounter with a Muslim that she met. So Ruskin sought to ground the definition of beauty in the character of the creator, and the pure-hearted artist witnesses to God's glory as manifest in the beauty of creation. So all great art is praise. And in MacDonald's story as well, artists have a holy calling as those who make visible and tangible the meanings buried in the beauty of God's world and in the hearts of his creatures. For all of nature is awash with living symbols. Art of all kinds, he says, sets these inner truths out in front of our eyes, allows us to see our innermost unspoken thoughts and feelings out in front of us. Most people cannot utter these things. Those who can are artists, whether painters, musicians, poets, sculptors, architects. And this showing of what we sense and feel but cannot express is the gift that they give to the rest of us. This painting is Ruskin's favorite painting by Turner, William Turner. And a character in Seaboard Parish is named Turner. It's a little wink to Ruskin.
And if I can
Yes,
on,
please do.
so Turner had been forgotten completely as well. So Ruskin reintroduced Turner to the public.
He believed Turner was like the greatest painter of all time. I have not found any evidence that Lily and MacDonald met in person. But in the autumn of 1900, when she is on holiday in Bude, Cornwall, Lily recognized the breakwater there as the very one described in the Seaboard Parish that she had read when she was a child. And so she painted it. And when she heard that MacDonald was ill and close to death, she sent him her painting that was inspired by the Seaboard Parish. And she wrote to him, "When I was a child of 13, your Seaboard Parish came out in the Sunday magazine and opened a new world. A year or two later, I found through unspoken sermons a God I had never dared hope existed, having been brought up in Calvinism. And since then, for years and years, the Diary of an Old Soul has been one of the books of all human books that has come with the most unfailing strength in troubled times." So she had found a way of seeing and a God that she had never dared hope existed. a God that was grand and gentle enough to fill up the swelling soul of an intensely sensitive, beauty-loving, artistic girl. Her love of the natural world, her love for science and travel, her poetic imagination, her visionary instincts, they could all find fulfillment and scope in this vision of God that she saw in MacDonald's work. Her family remarked that during this time after her father's death, there was a change in her, that something in her expanded. And they thought she'd be in her room playing with dolls and find her there praying. Her sister said a gravity came over her which remained in the memory of those nearest to her. Her great gift of love and sympathy seemed boundless. No trouble was too small or too great to bring to her. She simply shed a constant light over her home. Her quality of selflessness was unique. That was her as a teenager. The second great shaking of her life occurred in the summer of 1874. She and her mother found herself among 100 invited guests at the estate of Broadlands, owned by Lord and Lady Cowper-Temple, who I was talking about a minute ago. We found a letter from Lily. And she was attending what would become one of the most significant religious gatherings of the Victorian era. The conference had been organized for those who shared a common longing that the faith that they declared intellectually would become real to them and lead to deeper devotion and vibrant love and a dedicated service that went beyond the rituals and the socially accepted Christian lifestyle of the Victorian period. As guests listened to the biblical teaching and gathered for prayer, they found friendship in their shared search for holiness and deeper communion with God. The conference brought together an extraordinary mix of people. American Quaker Hannah Whittle Smith, who wrote the best-selling book, The Christian Secret of a Happy Life. Ex-Anglican theologian Andrew Jukes, a Plymouth Brethren. He had converted from Anglicanism to Plymouth Brethren, the French poet Theodore Bonnard, scientist evangelist Henry Drummond, and in later years MacDonald, and also the former American slave-turned-preacher Amanda Berry Smith, whom Lady Cowper-Temple personally escorted arm in arm into dinner on the first night to signal that we were equal. There's no racism here. During the same time, the American evangelist Dwight L. Moody and the musician Ira Sankey were conducting their second revival campaign across Britain. Moody was a former shoe salesman turned lay preacher. He drew crowds of up to 30,000 with his energetic personality and his message of God's love. Rather than scaring people into heaven with hellfire, he believed in loving them in. And his impatience with theological debates and denominational divisions resonated deeply with the Broadlands ideal of Christian unity. So Lily and her sister Emily volunteered at the West End Haymarket Opera House where Moody was preaching. They worked in the inquiry room, which was like a little counseling room afterwards. So any seekers or anyone going through anything could come for one-on-one talk and prayer. They participated in community outreach events, suppers for bus drivers, and you can see when you read about Moody, you can see why Lily would have been captivated by him, because he had begun his work as a Sunday school teacher for children. He was a storyteller. He collected parables everywhere he went, and he was constantly trying to retell the Bible stories in everyday language with vivid description and humor. And Lily shared a lot of that love for children, that sensitivity for how to speak to them, how to draw someone into a story through her imagination. And sometime in her late 20s, she was a Sunday school teacher herself, and she eventually wrote a little book of lessons for Sunday school teachers called Bible History Lessons for Junior Classes. And they show such a gentle sensitivity to children's needs and interests. And she says that at such a young age, the imagination is beginning to be developed and delights in fresh food, and therefore anything in the way of word picturing or illustration proves very attractive. And she lingers especially lovingly over the creation story. Picture the first sunrise on the quiet world. Picture it, all freshness and purity. No church or printed Bible or preached sermon yet, but every leaf and river and mountain speaking of God. And then where does she draw the child's eye? To beauty, She said, God created everything beautiful because he loves us, and that beauty is still all around us. She says, and what wonderful beauty there is still. The closer we look, the more we see. Think of what worlds a microscope or a telescope open up to us. Picture this, she keeps saying over and over again. Picture this, and she leads her little listeners into the stories with all of their senses. Picture this, Lot and his family brought out of a sleeping city into dim light, all quiet. Dawn breaking over the dark, high line of mountains. Angels pointing them over there. Think of how they all must have felt, she's saying. So she's awakening their imagination and their empathy and drawing them into these scenes, almost like painting them stroke by stroke in their mind, their minds. And this was exactly the same approach she would take speaking to adults for the rest of her life, always pointing them to this scene in her own imagination, bringing it alive for them. Imagination leading to worship, imagination leading to empathy, imagination always leading to relationship with God or with the people that she's trying to picture to them. So this becomes a constant theme. Picture this, picture this, picture this. So she begins teaching Sunday school during these years, and then in that summer of 1875, she finds a new outlet. She's asked to take a temporary post teaching a Bible class for just a few weeks at the Welbeck Street Institute, which is the first hostel for working women founded by the Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA, in London. It's just gotten started. And so that begins her work with the YWCA, which would grow and flourish until she was 35. So this is a big chunk of her life before she ever even thinks about the mission field. She begins to work with the YWCA. And then Venice, the next great shaking. It's 1876, and 23-year-old Lily and her mother are on a holiday after attending another spiritual conference in Switzerland. And suddenly her mother sees a famous face in the crowd at the hotel, a famous face with piercing blue eyes and a signature blue necktie. And later on, Ruskin, who's staying at the same hotel, tells the story in his own words during his lecture on the art of England at Oxford. Two English ladies, he says, mother and daughter, were staying at the same hotel. One day the mother sent me a pretty little note asking if I would look at the young lady's drawings. And on my somewhat sulky permission, a few were sent, in which I saw that there was extremely right-minded and careful work, almost totally without knowledge. I sent back a request that the young lady might be allowed to come out sketching with me. She seemed to learn everything the instant she was shown it, and ever so much more than she was taught. On the left is Ruskin's sketch of some of the arches in Venice. On the right is a sketch by Lily of one of the columns that he set her to work on. More of this is actually Ruskin's work. So he was actually a very talented artist and painter himself. This is some of his work. Her sketchbooks, he said, are exactly what we should all like to be able to do. They can be seen only with a magnifying glass, but with what skill is more precious to a traveler than that of minute, instantaneous, and unerring record of things that are precisely best. And if you visit the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford today, you can see these sketches by request. He deposited them at the Ashmolean, these early sketchbooks by Lily. And the archivist will give you a magnifying glass. They are just exquisite in their tiny, delicate detail, these light washes of watercolor. She captured scenes and details that most tourists would not even notice as they walk past. So that audacious first meeting was the beginning of a friendship and a mentoring that lasted for decades. Ruskin took Lily's under his wing and taught her both in London and his Lake District estate of Brantwood near Keswick. And he helped her skills to mature and flourish, introduced her to an elite circle of artists and writers. In fact, I just noticed, looking at his diary, that one of her visits to Brantwood would have overlapped with Charles Darwin and his family. So I'm just dying to know if there was a conversation.
Wow.
Yeah. And a few years, who was the person who loved lichen? There we go. Ruskin was mocked by fellow teachers at his school because he was always talking about lichen and making a student, he was just bringing in lichen and making his students draw lichen. And that was just like that was, at that time, people said, why lichen? So he also taught Lily to draw lichen. This is his painting of lichen, and his collection of rocks and minerals that he loved. So one day, after only a few years after they met, he confronted her with the great question of her life. Was she or was she not willing to be 100% devoted to her art? Because he told her if she gave it her whole heart, poured all her energy into this one thing, she had the potential to be the greatest painter of her day, to do things, he said, that were immortal. Now, I don't think that, and nobody who was close to Lily thinks that she was at all tempted by fame or fortune. It was not anywhere on her radar. But what he was offering her was a life of doing what she gave her the most joy, and surrounded by beauty, the beauty of nature, the vast amounts of time to just draw and to walk and to anybody who is an artist or writer in the busyness of the world knows what that kind of offer would feel like. You could just do this and nothing else for the rest of your life. And it plunged her into several days of just a crisis that was so painful, it just almost tore her in two. And she prayed because she was an artist down her very soul. But she was also being pulled in other directions. And the way that Ruskin had presented that to her so starkly, black or white, it's like, do this and only this. And she realized that she could not do that. Not because she knew what she was going to do, but because she needed to remain free and independent to allow the Spirit to direct her to wherever he wanted her to go. And she said she realized finally that she couldn't accept this and devote herself to art in the way that Ruskin said, and yet seek first the kingdom of God. So she turned him down, but she did not walk away from her art. It's a complicated decision, and we can unpack that more because it raises lots of questions. But I do want to make clear, and she made it clear in her writings, that this was a personal decision of her own call. This was not a judgment upon any sort of any other person's call. And later she would champion other people who were called in to be artists full time. So this was not about turning down art for her. It was, in her own language, being a dandelion in the field. She said, the dandelion has long ago surrendered its golden petals, has reached its crowning stage of dying. The delicate seed globe must break up now. It gives and gives till it has nothing left. There's no sense of wrenching. It stands ready, holding up its little life, not knowing when or where or how the wind that bloweth where it listeth may carry it away. It holds itself no longer for its own keeping, only as something to be given. A breath does the rest. And that's the way she saw her life. Something to be given, yielding to the breath of the Spirit, the wind that would blow her to wild and far off places. That was her vocation. She didn't define it. She just left herself open. Yes.
I guess I know the answer to this, but I want to ask, what does that question mean to you in your art and writing?
That's a great question. And one of the things that drew me to her originally was that I was in the middle of that very question. So that vocational dilemma of what role does art play in your life? That's what she was really wrestling with. Not art or no art, but what role does this play? This is something she recognized it as a gift, that something that God had given her. It was not a gift she had chosen. She said, I have nothing more to do with this than the color of my hair. This is something that she'd been given. So it was, what role does this play in her life? And is she going to be remaining open to whatever God called her, and ready to lay down even the things that she most delighted in? She said that I need to be ready to lay it down at a moment's notice. And God may ask her to take that up again. So it's a question that I've definitely wrestled with. It's not a quick answer to that. But I think that, as Lily found later in her life, I've learned that God doesn't waste anything. And then when you think you're laying something down, like grad school and archival research, it comes back around later, and God uses it in a way that you have no idea. I spoke with a young woman who was a missionary in not Algeria, Morocco, who had watched the documentary, who was inspired by Lily. She was a photographer. She loved art, and she really felt like after watching this video, she'd been called to missions. And when she made that decision, she thought she was leaving her photography behind, and it was just heartbreaking to her because she didn't know she'd ever be able to do this. And it turned out that after 5 years of missions, she ended up at the center of this photography nonprofit in Morocco, bringing and befriending artists there, and that turned out to be her ministry that she never expected at all. And so, like Lily, she had to sacrifice what her vision was of what this might be in order to accept what God's vision of that would be for her, and it turned out completely different from what she ever expected. And that's been the case with my life as well. Does that kind of answer your question? As I said, in the past, the angle of vocation has been so important to me, and now there's so many other things about her that also interest me, and I feel like I'm already running out of time. But this is this next section of her life, her work with the YWCA. I'm just going to skim right on past today because we don't have time, but it is so fascinating. And if you want to learn more about it later, I'd love to talk with you. This is where a lot of my detective hunts and research went, because there wasn't a lot known about this section of her life, other than that she worked with the YWCA. She did inner city ministry with working girls. She helped start the first restaurant just for women. She would walk the streets at night, finding victims of sexual exploitation and trafficking, which was a huge problem at this time, women who were tricked or drawn into prostitution. And she would find them and bring them to the hostel for, a safe bed. She had many friends among them. She said one night she spent up hours one night with a woman who was about to commit suicide. So lots and lots of stories from this point in her life. And she wasn't making a whole lot of art at this point, but there was something that was enormously creative and imaginative about the way that she was approaching that ministry of hers. And it's so tantalizing to wonder if she read the Vicar's Daughter, which is the sequel to the Seaboard Parish, which is, she was in so many ways following in the footsteps of the character of Marion Clare in that novel, if you've read it. And MacDonald, he says this about Marion Clare, this fictional version of Octavia Hill, who's another social reformer. He said, her ability to see the gleam amidst the gloom in London slums made her a true artist. And I think that about Lily, like that in turning down Ruskin's idea of what an artist would do, she embodied a true artist in a way that Ruskin, I think, could never really have imagined for her. All right, so this brings us to the last great shaking of Lily's life. At the matronly age of 35, when she's completely content with how the pieces of her life have fallen into place, she has a thriving ministry with the YWCA in London. She has a community, she has a family. She goes to a missions meeting, and the leader, the speaker, says, "Is there anyone here God is calling for North Africa?" And she feels this immediate, unexpected response in her heart. It's me. He's calling me. Mm-hmm. And so in March of 1888, with no organizational backing, they had turned her down for health reasons, no formal training, no knowledge of the language, no clear plans of what she was going to do, other than a very powerful conviction of God's leading. Lily and two friends boarded a steamship for Algeria. Yeah. And this seemingly impulsive decision, flying in the face of friends' expectations, social conventions, practical good sense, was the making of her. Far from giving up art to serve the Lord, some have misconceived it. It was in North Africa that all of the pieces of her calling finally came together. And her creativity flourished in 100 different ways. I've already shown you some glimpses of that, of her journals, this amazing visual record she left of those 40 years. And as you can imagine, there are so many stories that I could tell. But one thing that surprised me as I was digging into the second half of her life, which I had not planned to write very much about, I really wanted to focus on that vocational aspect. But what surprised me is that her artist's way of seeing the world spilled over into everything she did. It wasn't just about her painting. She didn't leave behind Ruskin's teaching or MacDonald's insights that had formed her. She became a kind of living embodiment of both of their visions, of the ideal artist, one whose imagination has been so purified by her love for the truth that she could look at anything, a mountain range, a cloudy sky, a human face, and see the glory of God shining through. For both Ruskin and MacDonald, seeing clearly was a profoundly Christian vocation. And you can't go very far into her life or her writings without running into this theme of seeing. She thought deeply about it and what it meant to truly see and how to do it and how to help others do it. And she wrestled with the spiritual implications of that gift that she knew she had, and connecting the dots between her artist's eye, and which Ruskin had trained so well, and this deeper kind of seeing that MacDonald called imagination. And like both of them, she spoke of two layers of sight, of outward vision and inward vision, the seen and the unseen worlds. And Seaboard Parish is full of this. And MacDonald writes in there that God, knowing our needs, built our house for our needs. Even when he speaks of the hidden things of the Spirit of God, he uses the forms or pictures of nature. The world is, as it were, the human, unseen world turned inside out, that we might see it. On the walls of the house that he has built for us, God has hung up his pictures, ever-living, ever-changing pictures of all that passes in our souls. And this description so perfectly captures Lily's relationship with the natural world. It's like she took up this image of MacDonald's and it became her banner. And it was like her lifelong quest was to explore that house and to find as many of God's pictures as she possibly could. She wrote, I have been asked for an Easter parable in the Sunday School Times in 1910, a leaf out of God's great picture book around us, where things visible and invisible blend into the unity that reveals one master thought. The Lord of the two worlds, the Arab names him, and so he is in truth. And the warp and woof of seen and unseen weave into a pattern that we shall only fully discern when we reach the heavenly place where it is wrought. Her journals overflow with moments of divine encounters with nature. The word of the Lord came unto me this morning through a dandelion. The great view above half a dozen countries at our feet has been God's voice today. Like MacDonald, he once described a character walking in the woods to read the word of God in his own handwriting. Mm-hmm. And Trotter, Lily was not afraid to call this voice that she heard resounding through nature the voice of revelation. But nature for Lily doesn't speak independently of scripture. They come from a single source, and their voices are almost always intertwined or linked. Linked was one of her favorite words. So what she sees in the world around her links so often with a biblical image or a verse. They sing together in chorus. Sometimes scripture is carrying the melody and nature the harmony, and sometimes nature is the one whose notes are soaring to glorious heights, and scripture is moving steadily underneath, infusing the song with depth and rhythm. She often read her Bible outdoors, alongside of her sketchbook, allowing the book of nature and the book of scripture to sing together in harmony. It is never long before, this is her, when she's in Switzerland, this is one of her journal entries from Switzerland. It is never long before God begins to speak when one gets away into his unspoilt world. She was there in Switzerland, exhausted body and soul, after a very hard season. And her artist's eyes, as weary as they were finding truth and refreshment in color. She said, I was looking this morning at the gray slope of that Steinfall and noticed how unbroken the tint was. It might have been laid on the mountainside with a great brush. The reason was that I stood in line with the sun, and with that flashed a truth unrealized till now, that the sun sees no shadows. This is something only a painter would notice. And that led her to a deeper understanding of the divine artist's love. that forgets all the half-heartedness and the unfaithfulness and floods and drown out all the failures in his radiance. Switzerland, she loves Switzerland. It gave her a lifetime's worth of metaphors. The soldanella flowers breaking through the snow in Switzerland. She drew them in all their stages of growth and breaking through, peeking their heads up out of the snow, drooping them until light caught them again. And their lesson finally became a published essay. She says, "We love to see the impossible done, and so does God. Let faith swing out on him. He is the God of the impossible." In her daily encounters with God's picture book, there are certain images that come up again and again for her, always bringing a fresh word of encouragement. The tiny buds that carry inside them the promise of new life, even in the midst of winter. The buds that form in the very scars left behind by the leaves that have broken off and fallen away. All are gifts to her from the God of hope. The daisies have come with a voice these days, she says. The ochre-colored fields in autumn, reminding her of the seeds that God has planted in the furrows of people's hearts and the harvest to come. The clearing blast of the cold north wind as it readies the world for spring, which is true of the inward as well as the outward world, she says. The mysterious throbbing life of the streams springing from the earth and watering the dry ground, a picture of the renewing life of the Holy Spirit poured out on parched soil. The clouds arcing up like angels' wings over an Easter sunrise. You can barely see her underneath writing the verse, if I rise on the wings of the morning and settle on the far side of the sea, there your hands will guide me. One of her favorite words for these moments is lesson. And it's a word that rings with many layers of meaning for her. There are school lessons, of course, and moral and spiritual lessons, but there's a deeper meaning for her too. And if you go to an Anglican church, you know that the scripture readings are called the lessons for the day. So you have the first lesson is the Old Testament reading. The second lesson is the New Testament epistolary reading. And she, as a good Anglican, borrows that language when she's talking about nature. So she says the lesson for today, when writing about some new insight that has come to her from the physical world. The fig trees are reading anew their lesson of resurrection life. Today's lesson had for its text my dry boots. Today's first lesson was in these little mountain paths. I followed mine only a few yards further this morning, and such an outburst of beauty came. You can never tell to what untold glories any little humble path may lead if you follow far enough. The second lesson was when I got there. It's as if creation itself is a cathedral in which God's voice is always resounding for her. And the trees and the mountains sing out praises. The lilies and the bees are her little comforters. The trees and flowers her prophets and teachers. The cherry blossom, she says, has been preaching a sermon this morning. Even in winter, when the songbirds are quiet and the colors are subdued, she writes, there is a harmony about them that suggests a deep, quiet organ tune that must lead on at last to a loud, more varied outburst of nature's music of sound and music of color. All of these many kinds of beauty in the world, she says, are different languages through which God speaks to different souls. I have so many things I could read for you, and we're already almost at 11 o'clock.
And don't stress, Jen.
Oh my goodness, I just want to tell you something.
We started a bit
Yeah. This, when you read her descriptions, especially her, these lessons that she finds in nature and how she's relating it to scripture, this is an example of how her brain is working. Okay, so the images are just like snowballs that are gathering more and more meaning. So this is one of her diary entries. The sun glowed and glittered this morning behind the lower branches of the beloved dome of the pine tree. And it makes her think of Psalm 19. In the heavens, God has pitched a tent for the sun. It is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. And then that sends her off to read the entire psalm again. The heavens declare the glory of God, and to see things that she had never understood before. And then that lights up other verses in the first chapter of Genesis about God setting up a tabernacle for the sun in the firmament of the sky and the heavens. And then that sends her to Isaiah. I dwell in the high and holy place with him also that is of a humble and contrite spirit. And then that makes her think of how the Earth's atmosphere seems so empty, and yet it's so full of ether, which was a scientific theory at the time, which has been debunked. But in her, what she knew at the time was that it was full of ether, enabling heat waves to come down to us from the high place far away where the sun reigns. And then she is led to wonder about how she also, as unnoticed and weak as she might be, could be a tabernacle and a medium of God's love and light. All that from a single sunrise. Scripture for her was a kaleidoscope of symbols, poetry, metaphors, especially the Old Testament, always showing her something new. And whenever something catches her eye, whether in Scripture or in nature, it's usually something that helps her imagine even more clearly and joyfully who God is and how he loves us and what he has promised he will do in the future. One day she's reading the Song of Songs, the verse about the beloved standing behind the wall and looking in through the windows and the lattice. And the lattice is lit up with beauty. And she says it's like she sees in this picture of the lattice work in Scripture a picture of Christ gazing steadily at us. Right now, she says, we are separated from him by a barrier of things visible. We cannot meet him in person yet or see him fully. He is on the radiant side of the wall, and we are on the dark side. And the breaches, she says, and the breaches that come through sorrow and love are windows through which that light and love may stream in, windows to look out by, not doors as yet. And through them we catch glimpses of his face looking in. And even the multiplied little rifts the lattice show him too, though more dimly. All the breaks that give an outlook through the seen to the unseen are infinitely worthwhile for those passing visions of the Son of God on the other side. Anybody hear some Leonard Cohen in there? That Leonard Cohen line about the breaks, let the light shine in, were inspired by a Sufi mystic poet. And Lily was also reading the Sufi mystic poets at the time. So I think there is, yeah.
It's interesting to me how she paints presumably Jesus as a younger boy. Was that is that the intent there, or?
I don't think that is. I think that was actually a picture of a child in the house.
Oh, okay.
And if I remember correctly, this is she would go up to her prayer room, and there was like a little window with iron bars, and this little boy would come in and he would push little pieces of paper through so that she could draw a picture for him that he could color. And so that he would push it through, and then she would push the little paper out again. And then later on that they would paint together, which I think is also a beautiful picture of God and us. So I think that's where that particular image is coming from. As I said, she loved science, and this is really remarkable at the time. This is the time of Darwin and lots of things shaking up people's view of the relationship between God and the natural world. And a lot of people, but not everybody, their faith was really going through a lot of shaking at this point too. Ruskin himself says, he confides to a friend, "You speak of the flimsiness of your own faith. Mine, which was never strong, is being beaten into mere gold leaf. If only the geologists would leave me alone, I could do very well. But those dreadful hammers, I hear them clink of them at the end of every cadence of the Bible verses." Well, Lily's father was a fellow of the Royal Geological Society. Several of her siblings became scientists. They clearly were not itching for the geologists to leave them alone. And she read scientific magazines for the rest of her life. She pasted them into her journal. There's never any hint of a conflict for her or any angst about a conflict between science and faith. Every new discovery led her to wonder and worship, and it was showing her something new about the way that God works, and was full of metaphors for the inner spiritual life as well. She was delighted by news of the first telegraph messages across the Atlantic, because human beings had accomplished this just by discovering a further secret of God's laws. She pasted this magazine article in her journal about the new giant telescope in California, and she marveled at the wonders it has revealed. It gave her an even greater understanding of God's love. She says, "A generation ago, 30,000 stars or so had been marked in the sky chart. And now the number photographed mounts up to 300 million. Among them is one so huge that the Earth could swing round in orbit inside of it. And of all these 99 sheep left in the fold, the Good Shepherd came down to the one tiny world that had gone astray to seek and to save. And he, the Lord of the 300 million worlds, calls us to rejoice with him over one sinner that repents.
Amen.
She rarely spoke or wrote anything without beginning with a metaphor, moving from the seen to the unseen. She wanted people to be able to see. The culmination of this was for 2 parable books, which I have brought so that you could afterwards or later on today read them yourself and look through them. The Parables of the Cross, Parables of the Christ. Both of them are filled with botanical illustrations depicting the stages of plant growth from seed to bud to flower to fruit. And she is just layer by layer unpacking those metaphors. And look again, she says, look again at God's picturing. And she's just peeling back, like petal by petal, the truths hidden within these things in nature for her. Right, I was going to maybe save this story for the holdings walk. So why don't I say, okay, there's another example. I'm going to save it for our walk. So this approach to metaphor and color resonated very deeply with the Arab people. And they were very culturally attuned to communicating through color and story and metaphor. So she also wrote many and illustrated many parables, stories for Muslim readers, children, men, women, relating scripture or spiritual truths to images that from the Algerian landscape that they would have been familiar with. And don't have time to go into her love for that landscape and her close attention to it, to the camels and the palm trees and all the uses, and how the details of that landscape and the details of these people's lives, she had paid such close attention to that she could relate it detail by detail to these, to communicate to them the truths that she wanted to tell them in the forms and in the images that they would understand and relate to. She was so good at this. This is her picture book for little girls about the birds and God's love for us, like the mother for her birds. To do this, she had to see them, see their world, see their struggles, see their personalities and their characters and their possibilities. Hardly anyone at this point in time in the Western, the Western culture was really, really looking and paying attention to the Arab people themselves. There were many people coming in, as tourists in that point in time and looking up, and that she wanted to go into their lives, and she earned their trust and their friendship, and she was brought into those intimate spaces of their lives by virtue of trust and friendship. And in that way, she was practicing that artist's eye, but directing it at people, seeing them in the way that she believed God sees us. And she filled her journals with little pictures of their faces and descriptions, and she kept noticing their faces. She says, such faces they have, these women, full of character and intelligence, forcible faces. This is a culture that the West believed was just inferior and kind of beyond the pale. She is just seeing this beautiful and fierce intelligence in them. And the Arab woman said of her, no one ever loved us like this. So she believed that we show God's love to others in the way of an artist by demonstrating what it is to be seen. And this involves both layers of seeing the outward, attending to their life, and then the inward vision of seeing the possibilities in a person that other people are going to miss. Again, so many stories that I could tell you about that. Her magnum opus at the very end of her life was a book for the Sufi mystics, these brotherhoods in the desert who she saw as authentic spiritual seekers, and they recognized her as a true seeker after God, and she earned their trust in a way that very few Westerners did, and certainly no women. And it was incredible that she was invited as a woman and as a European woman into their midst, into their conversations, and they treated her like an equal in that spiritual search and that intellectual dialogue. It was really remarkable. And so she really ended her life with this book that it was an early attempt at cross-religious dialogue and presenting the Christian gospel to them in the forms and images that they would understand. And she used the I am sayings in the book of John. I am the bread, I am the, and taking each of those metaphors, bread and life and light, and then relating it to what they were already talking about and seeking. She was finding that common ground with them. She said, there is between you and us much agreement. The Sufi is a man who has the purpose of discovering secrets, and they are the secrets of divine truth and divine power. He desires with all his heart to break through to the kernel, that is, to the things that are unseen and that have in them the essence of eternal life. And we, the Christians, are with you in this, for God created all of our visible surroundings in this world to enfold the true kernel that he would bestow on us. And this kernel of all things is the knowledge of himself. That is MacDonald's view of the world, translated into the language of a Muslim mystic. The God of the unseen world is the artist who made everything that we can see, and he speaks this truth to us through his creation. She related it to the Sufi poets that they would know, and to the science of algebra, and she didn't have a perfect knowledge of Sufism at that point in time. Nobody did, as missionaries have told me today, but she learned as much as she could about their point of view, put herself in their point of view, and then related to the gospel to that. And this is just, no one was doing this. It was way ahead of her time. And I love that one of the most radical things that she said, I think, about to and about the mystic brotherhoods of the desert. She tapped into their deep longing for a brotherhood by inviting them into a worldwide spiritual community, a kind of a global version of Broadlands, a life in which heart shall be linked with heart and all in one body with God. Her own tiny circle of Algerian Christians, there were never very many, it was a very tiny little church that she had, were one family with all of his people of every country and of all ages past. And at the last, he means to perfect us all together in a unity of which all earthly symbols are but a shadow. We need each other, she tells them. The church, the body of Christ, needs the Arabs. It needs the unique gifts and perspectives of the mystical brothers of the desert. At a time when Western superiority was rarely questioned, Lily was quietly envisioning a truly multicultural family of believers in which every culture contributes something essential to the whole. And in this way also, I think that she was an artist, imagining possibilities beyond the present. A picture that God is painting with all of his people that will be incomplete without all of them. That's where she became suddenly so relevant today, and I was like, led me into places that I didn't expect when I started this journey. This is going to touch on something that Pete's going to talk much more about later, which is her vision of eternity. He's not going to talk about her vision, but the fact that she was living and seeing everything standing on tiptoes, anticipation of eternity. Everyone who knew her commented on it. It's hard to even overstate how important this was. Like, everything she's doing and everything she's talking about is in light of the belief that we are only living in the beginning of the story, and that story is gonna go on, and there is a beautiful, perfected version of everything that we love on earth. And all of these broken, imperfect ministries that we have, all of the things that we think we have sacrificed and given up, like great big canvases to paint, and art careers, and whatever it is that we've had to sacrifice, that nothing is wasted, that there is an eternity lying ahead, where we will get to continue and perfect those very things that we are doing for God right now. There's this is one of her most beautiful, and I think, famous paintings in her journals. And it is of a bee, and she writes this. A bee comforted me very much this morning concerning the desultoriness that troubles me in our work. There seems so much infinitely to be done that nothing gets done thoroughly. If work were concentrated as it must be in educational missions or medical missions, there would be less of this, but we seem to only touch souls and leave them. And that's what the bee was doing, figuratively speaking. He was hovering among some blackberry sprays, just touching the flowers here and there in a very tentative way. Yet all unconsciously, life was left behind at every touch. As the miracle-working pollen grains were transferred to the place where they could set the unseen springs working. We have only to see to it that we are surcharged like the bees with potential life. It is God in his eternity that will do the work. All he needs is his wandering, desultory bees. And all the colors that she loved in her life, pointing ever beyond her to that New Jerusalem. All of her parables about flowers and seeds were ultimately aimed at this hope. Who can tell what harvest after harvest may be waiting in the eternal years after the summer of earth has faded into the far past? She wrote this in Parables of the Christ Life. And if we refuse to stay our faith upon results that we can see and measure and fasten upon God, he may be able to keep wonderful surprises wrapped away in what looks like now only waste and loss. We may not be able to see the value of our calling until that future day, but it will be worth waiting for. The harvest of the trivial and the monotonous may lie out beyond the stars. I love that. There are so many more slides that I could show you, and so many more things that I wanted to tell you about, and we're already out of time, but I'll talk a little bit more about a few of these things when we take the walk. I've got the parables books and this collection of her art and quotes here that you're welcome to look through. I've also got the Christian history issue on Lilias Trotter that Kirsten and I wrote an article for, and I've got a sidebar in there on George MacDonald. And I'm happy to talk more and answer any questions. A few things to look forward to, I guess, when you read the book is how she made artists of everyone around her, and how that imagination and that vision carried over into the work of the mission itself. How much imagination and art and creativity was part of everything that they did. How she prioritized laughter, boxing.
She had a camera, I think.
She had a camera. She in the later, I don't know when the camera that she had she put in a brownie box. That was it. So she did have a camera that she used later on. She taught the children art. Everything that she did and she made was full of art. And one of the last things that she wrote, she made a illustrated kind of a guidebook to Algeria for English readers, and she says the color pages and the letterpress are with one of the same intent to make you see. Many things begin with seeing in this world of ours. And of course, she's echoing and coming full circle back to John Ruskin's great truth that he told her, that the greatest thing a human soul ever does in this world is to see something and tell what it saw in a plain way. Hundreds of people can talk for one who can think, but thousands can think for one who could see. To see clearly is poetry, prophecy, and religion, all in one. I'm just going to quickly skim through here that is one of the last things that she ever wrote in her journal and spoke about. Was a quote from MacDonald: "Thy face the heart of every flower that grows." And then the final journal entries. We speak of the God of love and the God of peace, so seldom the God of joy. right there at the end of her life, just a couple of weeks before she died. This is the book that will be coming out in the spring of 2026. If only we could see. And I've put up there some ways that you can stay in touch with me. I'm starting a Substack. Haven't posted yet, but it is there. Up there, the QR code will take you to my link tree with all of these links. So please keep in touch with me through Facebook or Instagram. You can follow a little bit more of the journey of the writing the book and news about the upcoming release of it, as well as just keeping in touch with me. So thank you guys. I know I went a little long, but thank you for your patience. And yes, I'm happy. I love to talk about Lily, as you can imagine, and I can talk about her for the rest of the day if you want. So I will let Kirsten.
Thank you so much. My sister-in-law, who's a professor down at Baylor University in Texas, asked me earlier this month, of the books that you've read this past year, what are some of your favorite reads this past year? And I said, as I said to the clergy, is my chance to boast instead of Pete's chance. Hands down, like, the gap is huge. If only we could see, blew me away, made me cry, made me go, yes, made me go, oh my gosh, I have to give this book to everybody. It is such a beautiful book, and I'm so excited for it to come out into the world. Really excited, yeah. And if the question's about the book, great. Okay, go for it, Cheryl.
Does it have pictures in it?
Yes.
I am still waiting to hear from my editor. So the book is divided by chapters, and each chapter, of course it's divided according to colors. And the color, so each chapter is a color, and that color is kind of symbolic for what's the theme of that chapter. And for each of those colors, I've given them a piece of art that I hope that they will include, but it will be expensive, and so they have to check on just with the printing costs. So I don't know if there's going to be any art in the book, and I'll be sad if there isn't.
You guys can all pray for that.
Yeah.
You guys may have noticed that we do not in the schedule have time for questions. And that is very intentional on our part, because we have learned that actually giving time to mull over and think about what Jennifer has said, to converse with each other about what Jennifer has said. And we will be having this afternoon some group discussion time. It will be after Pete's time. And for you guys to discuss together some of your thoughts and questions means that when we come back together for the question time, which there will be for Jennifer and Pete both, that the questions will have matured. People ask so much, their questions are so much better. All of our questions are so much better for that time together, digesting them, processing them with each other. And so that's why we don't have the immediate question time now. It's very, very intentional. And so to mentally prepare yourself, that will be the case for Pete as well. As your schedule says, we are going to be having this, in a sense, our second Trotter session, and our Trotter and Arasha session. Let's meet at 11:45. I think that gives people plenty of time to, even, is that too generous? Should we say 11:40? 40's 15 minutes. Maybe we'll say 11:40, guys, to meet in the room right below us, in the big room. So grab yourself some muffins.